Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. Joining me, as always, is co-host Jen David Lang. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Happy
Fabulous.
2022. I got to get used to saying that. 2022.
And it's how many times have you written 2021 in the last week or two? It's just I can't get my head around it. But joining us today for our first episode of the brand new year, a very special guest, Kim Marshall. How are you, Kim?
Greetings. Very good.
So Kim's here and Jen's here. Well, Jen's the co-host. She's always here. But Kim's here today to talk about the new website that Jen and Kim have launched, which is the Best of the Marshall Memo. So it's bestofmarshallmemo.org, and we'll make sure we link to that in the show notes. But you want to start off, and maybe, Kim, you could start off and tell us, where did this come from? And it's free, right? So people can get to it without having to pay. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up at this place.
Well, I actually started about 3 years ago when, after doing the Marshall Memo for about 16 years, and Jen having done the main idea for how many years, Jen, was it at that point?
12 at that point, maybe 11, 12.
We cooked up this idea of pulling together the very best summaries from the Marshall Memo, which is a weekly publication summarizing best ideas and research, and making them into a book. And we started working on this and scoured the memo archive, which had thousands of articles uploaded from each week's memo. And we thought it would actually be easy at first, but it turned out to be quite difficult. First of all, what were the topics? And who would publish this thing, and what would it look like? And we just got deeper and deeper into it. But that was the origin, was creating not one, but two books of the Best of Marshall Memo and getting those published. And then realizing that actually the books were too cumbersome for people in schools. And we had the idea of the website, and then created the website, got a grant from a foundation, and launched that just about 6 months ago.
So in terms of what's on the website, so the summaries exist on there, but it's more than just the best of summaries, right?
Correct.
So, well, just to take a step back and give you a better overview of the two books, because first, this information existed in the books before the website, is we chose about 22 topics that school and district leaders care most about. So topics like planning and running effective teams, professional learning, coaching teachers, interviewing and hiring, making learning stick, assessment for learning. We chose 22 topics and we broke them up into two books of 11 topics each. And for each topic, we chose between 10 to 15 of the best summaries of articles on that topic. So you could sit down and read one chapter on time management or social emotional development and read about 10 to 15 article summaries, kind of like, like an ed leadership themed issue. And the idea was not for these books to be read cover to cover, but really if you have a particular issue, let's say your professional learning just isn't very effective, or the discipline at your school is not working, you could go to this specific topic. So now the same is true of the website. The website is organized in that same way with these 22 topics. So you can click on any one and get the 10 to 15 articles in a PDF.
And those, and maybe it might be helpful because you've got them, they're on the website, they're broken down into 6 big categories, right? So effective leadership, strengthening teaching, teacher growth, pedagogy that works, mindsets for learning, and then classroom nuts and bolts. And then those 22 sort of subtopics fit in under there, right?
This is actually where Jen's brilliant mind came in to this project, because my tendency, I have to admit, at the beginning was to just say, okay, well, there's 11 chapters, that we just have a list of 11 things. And Jen really pushed from the very beginning. We've got to organize these. We've got to have themes. We've got to have a structure to each one of these chapters in this book, and then hence also these 6 categories that you just mentioned on the website, which really are very logical kind of and very helpful in grouping these things into a coherent fashion. You mentioned that, or Jen mentioned the idea of a theme issue of Ed Leadership or Kappan or other magazines. They often have theme issues like this month's Ed Leadership. The theme, Kappan, the theme is rural schools, and Ed Leadership is engaging students. So it's similar to that. The difference with this project, though, is that we're spanning 18 years of publications. So we have a tremendous advantage over the editor, say, of Ed Leadership, who's looking around for authors who can write an article right now about student engagement, versus our ability to look across more than almost 2 decades and find the very, very best writing and thinking on a particular subject.
Well, and some things are timeless, right? I mean, they're as timeless as something can be in education, but still, I mean, just because it was written 15 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's out of date.
Actually, one of the best articles in both books is an article by Madeline Hunter from 1986, which I dug up out of an old issue of Ed Leadership, arguing that the pre-observation conference that many teacher evaluation processes use is a waste of time. It's simply not an effective use of time. You should be getting into classrooms, having conversations with teachers, looking at teacher teams and so forth, versus having this sort of dog and pony show pre-observation conference.
So my father, who has been retired for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, was trained by Madeline Hunter to train other teachers. How about that? For way back.
There's a connection. Too funny. Small world. Yeah.
She really was and is a guru. I mean, she was one of the most thoughtful people about teaching and learning ever.
But yeah, so Mike, we're arguing the opposite. Not that some articles are outdated, but just that any themed journal now only has articles from now. And yes, some of the best thinking was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So these articles span many years. And then to toot Kim's horn a little bit, you have to understand the breadth of what Kim is reading. He is reading everything from, the typical Ed Leadership to ASCD info briefs. He reads, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, New York Times. He reads Jennifer Gonzalez's Cult of Pedagogy. So he's really reading very deeply to already pick the best articles at that time. And then it's kind of like, we really should have called the website, Kim, the best of the Marshall Memo.
Correct. And there are very topical things too, like this in this week's memo, which just finished rolling out. It takes about 17 hours to send out to all my readers around the world. And one of the articles I felt best about was an article where I saw a very small item in The Week, which is sort of a news weekly magazine that I read. I was reading it at breakfast the other day, and there's a little article about why Zoom meetings are so exhausting. And so I looked it up online and found the Stanford News had written this up. And then it was a very obscure academic journal where it was originally published. So I was able to find that article, actually email the author, check in with him, and publish this article with a very interesting description of what, the psychological factors that make Zoom meetings, a whole day of Zoom meetings, particularly exhausting. So that's just an example of a very offbeat kind of article, but then the mainstream ones as well.
So when a school leader navigates to the landing page of the bestofmarshallmemo.org, sees the categories, and then says, I think, I want to take a look at this, this section on time management. So they go in there. What's in there? It's because it's more than just the summaries, right?
Well, I actually just clicked on it myself. And so we spent a lot of time designing this. We have a really good designer in Toronto, a couple of guys who have been working with the memo for years, and one of their wives who is the designer person, this aesthetic person. And so basically what you're seeing here is the table of contents for that particular chapter in the book, but we're not calling them chapters because on the website, they're not really chapters. They're sort of theme or areas. And we actually still haven't come up with a really good name for what they are. So what we have here is under time, managing time for impact, there are 3 big categories: the priorities, the whole issue of prioritizing, okay, the systems that you use to manage your time, and then the specific techniques, the tricks of time management, like managing workflow, the psychology of procrastination, and so forth. And so there you have the table of contents in this super brief sort of summary of it. And then you can click to get a full PDF of it, or you can click to get an audio recording. And so it takes about an hour to listen to the recordings, a little less time to read, if you're a reasonably fast reader. And then there are some other areas as well. So it's all clickable. And the decision we made actually fairly early on was to have no barriers at all. So you don't have to register. You just go in and click, and you've got it. You've the full PDF comes to your laptop, and then you can give it to your to your colleagues. You can read it in a study group. You can read it with the whole faculty, etc.
So the idea is to make it very, very useful, very responsive. You can think about an issue that you're confronting in your school, and you can, in the course of a couple of minutes, download, 15-page document with some up-to-date articles about the topic to help you think through them. And then at the end of each section, I wrote professional development ideas you can use with the section. So let's say there's become a huge discipline issue in your school. The transition back from remote learning to in-person learning has been rocky, and you don't just want to read yourself about different effective discipline techniques. You want to run your staff through some type of workshop or training. Well, at the end of each 15-page chapter or download, I give you ideas for how you could run a workshop on the contents of this topic.
Now, have you looked at any metrics in terms of how people are using the site? Have the web folks been able to give you any of that?
Well, we've got it set up so that I can actually look at reports, and Jen can as well. And so far, since we launched it in May, a little over 65,000 people have visited the website, and a little over 7,000 of the PDFs have been downloaded. So it's very active.
Okay.
We can actually look at the number of recordings and so forth. And so it's been active. It's not overwhelming, but it's active. And we really don't, though, have metrics on who's doing, but we think it's probably very similar to Marshall Memo readership and the main idea readership, which is principals, lead teachers, superintendents, consultants, instructional coaches. That's sort of the main demographic that I think we're hitting.
So how do you hope people use it? In an ideal world, how would you like to see this website and its content impact the field?
Well, I want to hear Jen's latest thinking about this, but one thing that I'm hoping for is that principal training organizations and teacher training organizations will use it. I just was emailing with one of the authors of this week's memo, Hunter Gelbach, who was at UCLA and is now at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And he said, wow, we're rethinking our teacher training. We could use this website. I just think, if you're a professor or running a workshop or running a training institute, the ability to say to a group of people, here's an issue we're focusing on, take 1 hour and read through this collection, and you will have pretty much the best thinking of the last 20 years on this topic. Now we're going to dive deeper on specific areas. My worry is that academic people will turn up their noses at this, that they'll say, oh, it's like the Reader's Digest, but it's much more than that. And so we're hoping that it will be not only frontline educators, but also people in the academic world who are training the next generation of leaders and teachers.
I think all three of us have been in the field for a while, and too often we see educators recreating the wheel, right? You have a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal trying to solve a problem just, with their four walls around them. And I think the idea is that we want to help connect people to what works in education by providing this material. So one, you don't have to recreate the wheel. It's almost unheard of to have a problem in your classroom or your school that no one else in this country has had, right? So we're trying to connect people to research by making it more accessible. And Kim's right, it's great if you're trying to plan some type of professional learning, or even let's say you observe a teacher, right? And a teacher is having trouble with classroom management. You are unlikely to hand the teacher a full 400-page book on classroom management. And if you go into Kim's archives and you click on in his database the topic of classroom management, there's got to be hundreds of articles on it. So what we did is we chose the best ones. So you could share a few book summaries with a teacher whose class you just observed who needs some tips. You could have a professional development session on the topic of classroom management that you've designed, and we've already given you the 10 to 15 best articles. Because I know when I used to plan professional learning sessions, I would go through Kim's archives and, there'd be, dozens and dozens of articles, and that takes time. So we're really trying to save school and district leaders time by pulling out the best articles for them. So that is a hope to connect research to practice and to save time.
Beyond the narrowing down of the universe of Marshall Memo summaries into the focus areas of the book being a challenge, because I imagine that was an incredible challenge trying to narrow that down. What else was challenging about putting the books and the website together?
I think I alluded to this earlier, and this is, again, Jen's major contribution to this among many, was the organization within each chapter. Okay, so here you got 11 or 12 articles that are great on this topic. How do they fit together? What groups do they fall into? What's the sequence that they should be in? What's the introduction? And then, all important, what's the PD suggestions that at the end? I think that's where our two minds really came together, because I, again, tend to be sort of logical, sequential. Jen is more of a holistic thinker, grouping things and putting things in. And that took a lot of work. Again, we thought this was going to be easy. Again, just to see the hierarchy here from the random collection of articles that I do each week in the memo. Now, it's really nice. People get, tens of thousands of people get the memo and they sit down there today, they're getting it in their inbox, and some of them wait until the end of the week and some of them read it right away. And here's this eclectic group of articles about student engagement and about Zoom meetings and about a few other things, which is interesting, but it's pretty random, because what I'm summarizing is what comes into my mailbox each week, is the 60 publications that I subscribe to. So the next stage then is the memo archive, is grouping, uploading things, which I do every evening, every Monday evening before I start sending the memo out, by topic, by author, by publication, and so forth. Then the next stage is a week later, I decide what are the very, very best articles from that week when I have a little perspective. So those are the so-called classics in the memo archive that are in red. But then this is the final stage of what are the best of the best of the best. Thank you, Jen, for that turn of phrase, and putting them in these books. So it's so super curated that it should really be extremely helpful to people in the field and in the academic world.
So let's talk through another one of the areas we had talked about. I think I mentioned, I don't know which one we talked about before. Let's talk about mindsets for learning. So in that one, you've got 4 categories: beliefs about students, social, emotional development, race and equity, and partnering with families. So anything kind of noteworthy in that area that, I guess, talk a little bit about why those categories in that grouping.
Well, I just want to step back first before we do that and say, another challenge in the book was figuring out, the audience. This is primarily for school and district leaders. And yet, if you look at some of the topics, they're, beliefs about students for teachers, right? Partnering with families for teachers, expert teaching, differentiation, literacy for teachers. And that's because, a lot of books for leaders focus on leadership. And Kim and I believe that principals need to be instructional leaders first and foremost. You can't go in and observe teachers and give good feedback if you don't know your instruction, if you don't know what works about pedagogy, if you can't spot, a mindset in a classroom where a teacher isn't paying close enough attention to the social emotional development of kids, or they're teaching in a way where they don't really have a belief that all students can learn. So I just wanted to point out that even though a lot of these topics sound like they are for teachers, they are, and school leaders should be aware of them.
Just to take the topic of race and equity, which is one of the things in this area, that was one of the most interesting and challenging chapters of the books to do. We enlisted the help of an African-American educator in California to help us with this and to write the PD suggestions, because we really wanted somebody who had worked with this issue over the years. And the categories there, I'm looking at it now, are really the center of the debate that's come to the fore in the wake of George Floyd's murder. Implicit bias and microaggressions, what many people of color are experiencing on a daily basis. Discussing the undiscussable, the walking on eggshells business, the whole issue of white privilege and so forth. Challenges for children of color, the specific issues that pertain to children in schools. Stereotype threat, the work of the Stanford professor on that issue. which is it's just one of the most fascinating psychological theories. I just finished reading Whistling Vivaldi, Claude Steele's amazing book, which is summarized in one of these articles. And then finally, cultural proficiency, given that many teachers of children of color are of the white persuasion, so what do they need to have in their heads and under their belts to do an effective job of teaching all children in front of them? So it's a rich and fascinating chapter, and that has gotten a lot of hits. We can track that on the website, and a lot of people have downloaded that chapter.
It's interesting because I remember from just reading the Marshall Memo, several of those articles jumping out as being really powerful. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Other thoughts?
There is another category on the website, which is in the band at the very top there, called All Faculty Discussions. And this has 24 articles. I just added one a couple of weeks ago that lend themselves to being read live by an entire faculty in one room or on a Zoom call. By now we're back in one room mostly. And these are articles that are so general and so important to the field that you literally could give a hard copy of this memo summary to everyone in the staff, have them read it silently, which would take 5 or 8 minutes, then turn and talk in a small group using a protocol. And Jen is a big expert on protocols, so that everybody gets a turn, everybody puts their sort of thoughts, the favorite quotes, favorite ideas, disagreements in. Then the whole faculty comes together and discusses the implications of this article for the whole school. And these are like the super curation kind of articles. And so, for example, the elements of giving effective feedback to students, getting students to do more of the heavy lifting, cutting down on workload, on teachers correcting workload, not overloading working memory, these things that pertain all the way from pre-kindergarten to a high school class.
And I want to add that for any school leader or other leader who feels uncomfortable about running professional development sessions or feel like they have to bring in some kind of outside expert and pay thousands of dollars, this is just a really clear and easy way to get some learning done on your faculty, right? You copy a single page or two and pass it out, and you do the live read there. None of this assigned reading and expect that people show up having done the reading. No, you do it live. Everybody's sitting there quietly reading it. It works remotely as well if you're having your faculty meeting remotely. And then you discuss what it actually says, what you interpret it to mean, and then what are the implications, what are the action steps? Because Kim and I are fans of not just reading for the sake of reading, but it's not just the what, it's the so what, now what do you want to go back to your school and do? So these articles that Kim has identified in the all faculty discussion tab work for, K-12, all teachers. It's not very specific to, let's say, 10th grade physics teachers. So that's a very simple way to ensure learning, because by having a text to ground you, then you sort of get rid of those faculty discussions where people start, pontificating about their experience or connects to what they did last weekend, but it really grounds them in the research, in the reading.
I want to zoom in on one of the articles in that all faculty area. It's called Getting Students Actively Involved in Consolidating Their Learning. It's a piece by Kathy Gansky from The Reading Teacher from 2017. And it starts with her describing how when she came home from school as a kid, her father would always ask her, "What did you learn in school today?" And of course, her initial reaction was, I can't remember. But then she says, "I kept my eyes and ears open throughout the day for potential candidates for demonstrating understanding." And her father sort of kept this up. And then she, as a teacher, began to ask her kids to think about this literally as they were lining up to leave the school at the end of the day. And then her kids began to put together a newsletter of these sort of big ideas and key understandings that they got. And this had a powerful effect on the quality of learning in her classroom. It's a very simple thing of basically her father asking her, "What did you learn today?" and recapping that. So just a wonderful article. Literally, it's just 1 page long, the Marshall Memo summary. And there you have a wonderful discussion for a staff. How are we doing that? How are we reinforcing learning? How are we getting kids to retrieve learning, consolidate learning, decide what's most important, and embed it in long-term memory?
Are there plans for expanding the website at all? Not that you two are looking for more work to do, but as feedback has come in, as people have interacted with it, is there anything rolling around in your heads in terms of what might be next when it comes to this?
Well, Jen and I have been thinking about this. So the big change now is that it took basically a year to put together each of the books. I mean, a year of curating and discussing and going back and forth and getting a publisher and everything. Now we could do one chapter. So we're thinking of it, asking my readers and perhaps Jen's readers too, what is the top of mind for you? You know, I mean, we've done 22. What's the biggest issue that you would like us to start pulling together articles? And we could probably do that. I don't know, it might take a month to do it, but we could do it much more quickly than doing the whole book. And then we can, add a chapter because the website is very flexible.
I imagine top of many people's minds is leading change, leading with change you didn't ask for during this particular time at this moment. But
Sure.
We could survey and see.
Or mathematics. I mean, we have a literacy section. We don't have a math section. There's tons of article in the memo archive about math learning and so forth. There's just lots and lots of possibilities. In fact, we have a long list. But I think our strategy is to do it one at a time. Just take it slow, ask our readers first, get, really poll the issue, and then, just do the same process, which we're pretty practiced at now, just going into the archive, digging out stuff, organizing and thinking it through, putting it together, and then publishing it.
So it's not static. The idea is that even existing categories and subcategories might expand with individual articles, or there might be additional big categories and subcategories. Is that sort of what I hear you saying?
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
But I
you don't have to commit.
Yeah, no, I think rather than, and I must say, as I read for the memo each week, I'm thinking, is this article on, classroom management better than any of the ones we have in the classroom management chapter? And so far, the answer is no, so far, but there might be. So, but I think the main focus now is going to be on new topics, ones that we haven't covered, because 22 is not a magic number. I mean, clearly there are other topics that we can get into.
So the name of the website is bestofmarshallmemo.org. So I've been talking with Kim Marshall and Jen David Lang, who have written the books and then used them to turn them into a website that is free for anyone to access. And there's very clear directions on how to access articles. And I have to tell you, the organization is spectacular. It makes a ton of sense. You can tell, and I know I mentioned it before, I just can't imagine the challenge of culling hundreds of articles down into the best of the best of the best, as Jen says. And I just think what a gift to the field that people have access to this depth of professional learning, but in a way that's consumable. I just thank you for putting it into the field.
Well, this is music to our ears, because it really was more than 2 years of hard work to put this together. And it is, I think, visually great because of the help from the designers, and logically great because of Jen's organizational mind, and then substantively great because there's just so much good material there. But it's narrowed down to something that can be read in under an hour or used by a faculty. In fact, one of the interesting questions, and Jen and I have talked a lot about this, is if you're a principal, how do you use that chapter, for example, on memory, on what makes learning stick? And one approach is to basically divvy out the 15 articles in that chapter, have one person or group of people read each one, then report out to the whole group, so that in the space of like half an hour, you could get the entire chapter talked through by an entire faculty or by perhaps a teacher team. So just the way these are used is very flexible because they're so portable. And that was one of our big goals: make this portable, make it not a big clunky 400-page book, but a PDF that you can grab, share, read, discuss, take apart. I mean, it's portability and lack of friction. Those are two of our big calling cards.
It makes complete sense to me. I could see, and don't just take my word for it. I mean, if you go on the website, the luminaries that have endorsed the website are just, it's a who's who of what's going on in education. Roland Barth, John King Jr., John Saphir, Larry Cuban, Douglas Reeves, Mike Schmoker. I mean, this is, you guys really got some good endorsements there.
Kim is very well connected. He knows everyone. Everyone knows Kim, and Kim knows everyone.
Well, so is Jen. Super well connected and super proficient at this kind of work.
So the big idea here is subscribe to the Marshall Memo, subscribe to the main idea. Links will be in the show notes for both, and use this website. And we'll check in again at some point in a little bit to see how traffic is. And I wouldn't be surprised if some sort of community sprung up around this. I could see, people interacting at distances about what's in here and how they've used things, and giving suggestions to one another. It just seems like it's ripe for that sort of collaboration.
And people should feel free to reach out, even though Kim knows everybody. He will answer your email within 24 hours. So reach out if you've got questions or thoughts or want any kind of partnership.
Great.
All right, thank you very much, both of you. Always a great conversation. I appreciate the time, and here's to a productive 2022.
Heary. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the
all of
School
you, and much
Leadership Show,
success.
a podcast
Bye-bye.
for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.